Hey everybody, my name's Darryl Robert. Welcome back to Journey to VR. So this week, I'm going to continue refining my environment. I want to add more graffiti to the walls, and I want that graffiti to look like it existed before we even started the reality capture process. So to do that, I need to come up with a way of lighting texture maps and have them appear as though they're part of that environment, something that would be there even before we started the photogrammetry process. And that's what I'm going to walk you through today. All right, so here we are inside of Photoshop, and I loaded up a photographic reference of the effect that I want to get to. I want to put black and white graffiti on my walls. And you'll notice that even though this is pure black and pure white, there's lots of subtle little color variations happening because of the environment that it's in. And that's exactly what I need to have happen on my urban tag. When I put this in my environment, it needs to also look like it was part of that environment, so it needs to get some lighting information contributed to its overall look and feel from that reality capture. So how do you do that? Well, we're going to do it inside of Maya using Arnold. I'm going to actually show you the end result, and then I'll walk you through the process of how I got there. So what we're checking out now is the reality captured environment, and attached to that, I've added in a layered texture. So the base layer obviously is the texture map derived from the photogrammetry. Layered on top of that, I've got the black and white version from Photoshop. So this is just pure color, black and white. Now I've added in a little bit of bump map information by taking the luminosity of that concrete wall and shoving it through a bump node to give it a little bit of bumping so it looks like it's grounded a bit more. And I also took the alpha channel and then clamped that down using a color correct node and shoved that into specularity, so where the paint is, it's got a little bit of specular pop. So those couple things help, but it's still really just black and white color, and it doesn't look like it's part of that environment. It's not tinted correctly, it doesn't have any bright spots where there should be, and there's no diffuse lighting or shadowing happening on that. So the next version is the finished version of the texture map. This is the end goal. This is what we're going to get to. So obviously if I toggle between those, the effect is subtle, but it really goes from not working to grounding into the environment and looking appropriate. It's obviously got the right tint that's happened to it. It's a little bit brighter on the top than it is on the bottom. There's some diffuse happening here. There's obviously where the shadow line's coming down on that concrete, where it gets to the painted texture map, it just continues right across. And then obviously the little shadow that's happening underneath the hand railing. So all these little things really go into making it look correct or appropriate. So very, very subtle change, but the end result has a big impact. So how do we get there? Well, we use image-based lighting workflows to do it, and I'm going to show you two different ways of doing that using Arnold inside of Maya. So the first workflow is pretty standard. It's going to be using a spherical lighting probe to generate the lighting information, and we're going to use that to texture map this Journey to VR logo. In Arnold, all you have to do is create a sky IA dome, which is what we just made right there, and then texture map onto that guy this spherical lighting probe. So when John Tojak did my reality capture, I had him generate several spherical high dynamic range probes that we can then use exactly for things like this, like reflections and lighting. So what we're going to do is we're going to just drag and drop that spherical lighting probe into our environment. We'll drop the intensity down a little bit to something like 0.4. And you can see that as I tumble this around, it's, you know, a nice little probe of that environment. Obviously, there's a really bright light source over there, and because it's high dynamic range, you can, you know, go through the exposures and really get a sense of all the information that's stored in that. So we're going to be using this photographic information to light our Journey to VR logo. So if we jump over to our locked down camera and we render this guy out, it is really pretty straightforward. The only light in my scene right now is that, that sky dome. So it's going to give me this nice tone that's going to be based on that photography. Pretty straightforward. It's obviously going to have some directionality because of that really bright light source that's in the upper left-hand corner, and you'll start to see that as this starts to fill in here, the buckets start to fill in. You can see that sort of directionality happening where we're getting that little bit of shadowing happening on the R from the U, and it looks pretty cool. Now the problem with this is, because it's basically just a sphere wrapped around my scene, it doesn't really have a sense of where is the wall, where is the floor, where really in world space was that light source. So the end result looks good, it's kind of accurate, but it's not as good as it could be. What we're going to do next for the second version is actually use that same spherical information, but this time we're going to project it onto the actual geometry, and the geometry become the light source. So we'll save this image out so that we can flip back and forth to it for reference. We can go ahead and delete that AI Sky Dome. We don't need that guy anymore. And what we're going to do is we're going to turn on an alternate version of my geometry that has this shader attached to it. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind here. First, this shader is a spherical projection. So if I grab this spherical projection node, the thing that's kind of cool is when John was doing the reality capture and making these spherical probes, he took some information down on where that probe was, so he knew exactly where to place this projection node. And you'll notice that as I start to move this across the geometry here, it just slides across the geometry, and you can really get a sense of how that spherical lighting probe lines up in Viewport 2.0 in real time. I think that's so super cool. And keep in mind, this is still high dynamic range. As I start to drop down those exposures, you really get a sense of what's going on with that guy. So that's really pretty sweet. Now, we take the geometry and we make sure that the geometry and its render stats are set to not cast shadows, not receive shadows, and primary visibility is turned off. So essentially, it's just there generating the light, but it's not used to fill in the background pixels and things like that. Then it's just, all that information is just shoved into an AI standard shader. And the important thing on the AI standard shader that you want to map is the, let's get this guy right here. It's the emission color. So turn off specular and go down here to emission. So you want to map the texture map color into emission color and make sure your scale is set to 1. With that done, you're all set to render this guy out. So if we jump over to our locked down camera, we bring up our render view. I saved that image already, so we can just click the render view here. And it's going to go through and re-render this image. So now the lighting information is going to be a bit more accurate because it's going to actually be kind of generated in the real world space, like where that light was. That's where the light actually is because it's being projected onto that geometry in that location. So really pretty fun, super cool workflow, and I'm so happy it actually worked. It's super cool. All right, so now that the render is done and we toggle back and forth between the two different versions, you can see that they look similar, but the second version has a bit better diffuse quality going across it. The directionality of that light source is a little bit stronger and a little bit better defined. It just looks a bit tighter and a bit more accurate. So that's the image-based, or the spherical lighting probe, and then this is the geometry-based workflow. So pretty straightforward, really easy to set up, and the end result looks pretty sweet. So to finish this off, what I ended up doing was basically just putting a piece of geometry over on the wall where I wanted it to be. So we'll just hide this Journey to VR logo. We'll jump over to our left view and we'll bring up our logo maker. And I turned off this guy and turn off the details for that guy. So with that set up, we'll basically go through and render this guy out, and you'll get a good idea of what this ends up looking like. All right, so this is what the texture map looks like when it's done rendering out. And obviously it looks much better than just a black and white image. It's got the right tonal quality. It's got it's kind of brighter on the top. It gets a little bit darker on the bottom. There's this nice diffuse stuff happening and this nice directionality happening on the little shadows for all the railings and pipes and things like that. So it just makes it work, and it's really pretty cool. Now there's one final thing worth mentioning, and that's the fact that these spherical lighting probes are going to be very localized to the area that they'll work in. So if I move this around, obviously all this geometry in the front looks good, but all the information that's getting projected from the spherical lighting probe in the back of the staircase obviously isn't correct. So what I'm going to be showing in part 2, the next demo that I'm creating, is going to be how to generate a single shader that combines multiple spherical lighting probes so that the whole model has high dynamic range image information projected onto it that works in every area. So that's going to be the next presentation that I record. Make sure you come back to check that out. Now, if you're watching this demo on YouTube or on Vimeo, make sure you go back to the Journey to VR blog on the area. We're adding tons of content onto it, both demos that are video-based as well as written articles. So make sure you go check all that content out. Thank you so much for taking the time to check this out. Cheers, everybody.